This could have been a breakthrough agreement in the war started by Russia, when separate but the same content documents on safe grain exports from Ukrainian ports were signed by Russia's Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Ukrainian Infrastructure Minister Alexander Kubrakov.
And let there be no doubt, this is an agreement for the world. It will bring relief for developing countries on the edge of bankruptcy and the most vulnerable people on the edge of famine.
24 hours have not passed since the agreement was signed, when missiles hit Odesa. Odesa is one of the 3 key Ukrainian ports from which it was planned to ship the outstanding grain by sea. The Ukrainian armed forces managed to knock down 2 of the 4 missiles. The Russians attacked the very place where grain is stored in the Odesa port. This is how much the contracts signed with the country that sponsors terrorism are worth. Russian missiles have also hit other parts of Ukraine. They hit air and rail infrastructure in the Kirovohrad region. 3 people were killed, 13 were injured. Kharkiv and Mykolaiv were also shot at. Alarm sirens were sounding from this morning almost all over Ukraine. Russia continues shelling the cities, although it has suspended its offensive at the front. They are probably no longer able to carry out any further offensive to cover up this stalemate on the Eastern Front. Russia has been using the methods of rocket terrorism against civilians, which have been well known for 5 months. One point of the grain export agreement contains an entry not to shell civilian infrastructure located in ports responsible for loading grain onto transport vessels. The diplomatic action that has lasted for a month has now come down to the fact that the document failed. According to the Ukrainian side, approximately 240 Russian soldiers have been killed in the last 24 hours. In total, Moscow was to lose nearly 40,000 military personnel and more than 1,700 tanks since the start of the war. U.S. HIMARS launchers are proving invaluable in conducting artillery fire. Thanks to these missile systems, Russian air raids decreased by a minimum 5-fold. The United States is planning further deliveries. Ukraine is talking more and more about the counteroffensive, but to get started, it must first obtain more weapons from the West. Defending a territory is something else, and such defense is sometimes even done through very simple paths. When you need to drive the enemy out of the occupied territory, you have to use the equipment which Zelensky constantly talks about, that they badly need tanks and especially barrel and rocket artillery. The United States, Great Britain, and Poland are the undisputed leaders in the supply of weapons to Ukraine. On the other hand, Germany, despite earlier assurances, is not fulfilling its obligations. I have already explained on several occasions that we need to look specifically at the artillery to see how we can provide Ukraine with more support. We can't get tanks for Ukraine right away. There is also an impasse between Warsaw and Berlin regarding the transfer of German tanks to Poland. Now it turns out that there would only be 20 German Leopards. The Polish Ministry of Defense has donated almost 300 T-72 tanks to the fighting Ukraine. 20 tanks is a bit of a silly number, because the minimum number we expect, well, at least for one battalion, such a subunit, is about 50 tanks. In the negotiation process, the less information is communicated to the public, the better, because we talk about artillery and that the Polish army is rearming. I am a Varsovian, and I will probably remember for the rest of my life my grandmother's saying, "Don't be fooled." And this seems to be the case. We were fooled by the bastards. Ratings agency Fitch has downgraded Ukraine after the country began the formal process of deferring payments on its external bonds and restructuring nearly $23 billion in sovereign debt. Ukraine's insolvency is imminent, according to the agency.